Isn't it a great day to be a Christian? Open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that the righteousness of his disciples had to exceed that of the Pharisees. And earlier we looked at what that meant when we talked about committing adultery. We talked about what that meant when we talked about hatred and lust and wanting to kill people, that kind of stuff. Tonight we're going to look at Jesus' command regarding taking oaths and really about honesty in general. So let's go back to Matthew chapter 5 and read beginning in verse 33. Jesus said, "Again you've heard that it has been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Are you a man or woman of your word? When you say something, can people believe you? Do you say what you mean and mean what you say? When you say something, do people accept that as the gospel truth? Well, do you ever find yourself saying honest or I promise or I found myself saying, I'll tell you the truth. Well, does that mean when I don't say that I'm going to lie to you? I mean, do we mean what we say? Do we do that all the time? In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking about swearing oaths. Remember, we said already, he said back in verse 20, that your righteousness had to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees if they're going to go to heaven. Now in their speech, he's telling them what that means for their righteousness to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. So tonight, we're going to look at four different things. We're going to ask four questions or try to answer four questions about what Jesus was talking about. Number one, what did the law of Moses actually teach? Number two, how had the Jews, particularly the scribes and the Pharisees, twisted that around? Number three, what did Jesus teach in response to that? And number four, did Jesus forbid us even taking oaths when we go to court or for something like that? So let's look at these questions. First of all, number one, what did the law of Moses actually teach concerning the swearing of oaths? Let's go back to the law. Turn to Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus 19 verse 12 says, "And ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord." The law says if you swear by the name of God and you don't keep your oath, you're using the Lord's name in vain. Not only are you lying, but you're bearing false witness, you're also taking the Lord's name in vain. You're breaking two commandments when you swear in God's name and then don't keep your word. Don't do what you're saying you're going to do. Now go over to the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 30. Numbers 30 verse 2 says, "If a man vow a vow unto the Lord or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth." In other words, if you swear an oath, if you swear to God that you're going to do something, you better do it. It's important that you do what you say you're going to do. Now go over to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 23. Deuteronomy 23 verse 21 says, "When thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee." All three of these passages say that you've got to tell the truth. That's the emphasis. It's on being honest. It's on truthfulness. It's on faithfulness. It's on not taking God's name in vain. A person has to be honest when he swears an oath. He must truly mean it. You can't say something and not plan on doing it. If you do, that's sin. Not only does God expect truthfulness, he realizes that deceit is a heart problem. It's just not what comes out of your mouth that's a sin. It's what's in your heart that causes you to lie. In fact, he stressed that in both the Psalms and the prophets. Look at the 15th Psalm. Psalm 15, beginning in verse 1, it says, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness and speaketh the truth in his heart. So the psalmist says that lies and the truth are not something that comes out of your mouth. It's what's in your heart. You're trying to deceive somebody. It's because you're planning to deceive somebody. Turn over a few pages to the 24th Psalm. Psalm 24 verse 3 says, who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in his holy place? And then verse 4 answers and says, he that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. So if you're swearing and you're not keeping your word, then you don't have a pure heart. And you're not going to stand in God's holy hill. Now let's look over at the prophets. Let's go first to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 5. Jeremiah 5, beginning in verse 1, says, run ye to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem, and see now and know, and seek in the broad places thereof, if you can find a man, if there be any that executeth judgment, and seeketh the truth, and I will pardon it. And though they say, the Lord liveth, surely they swear falsely. In other words, they might preface their statement saying, well, as sure as God lives, I'll do this, that, and the other. But Jeremiah says they're lying. They're using the Lord's name in vain. They're swearing falsely. Go over to the prophet Hosea. Hosea chapter 4. Beginning at the start of chapter 4. Hosea 4:1 says, hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there's no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood toucheth blood. So the laws and the prophets were clear. God expected his people to have an honest heart. He expected them to speak truthfully, and if they took a vow, they needed to fulfill it. If not, then they were using his name in vain. So that's what the law said. Now let's look at question number 2. How had the Jews, and particularly the scribes and the Pharisees, interpreted and applied this law? Well, he began his passage in Matthew 5, verse 33, when he said, again, you've heard that it hath been said of them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself. He didn't say it is written. We just read what was written. We read what the law says. He said, here's what the Pharisees say. Here's what the elders say. Here's what the traditions say. By the time that Jesus was teaching, things had shifted. They weren't really doing everything that they were supposed to be doing. The prophets had taught that God's name was to be revered. If you swore something in his name, you better do it. Then the scribes and the Pharisees came along, and now it's more an issue of just checking off the right boxes. You had to have the right actions. You had to go through the right motions. It wasn't about the heart anymore. The scribes and the Pharisees basically said this, an oath wasn't valid unless you used the Lord's name. Unless you used Yahweh in your oath, it wasn't valid. And then they said God's name is so holy, you can't use his name. And so the oath wasn't valid unless you use Yahweh, but you couldn't use Yahweh's name in an oath because that would be taking God's name in vain. So they couldn't do that, so they substituted something. They couldn't use the name, so they would substitute something that was a representative of God. So you had to swear by something that was a good reference to God because they wouldn't actually speak the name of Yahweh. And so they would do something like you could swear by God's holiness or God's mercy or God's righteousness. And then you'd have to tell the truth. So that was what they'd have to do to make an oath back then if they were going to do it. But if you made an oath and you used something that was too distant from God, then you didn't have to keep your word. It wasn't binding unless you used the right stuff. So if you said you're going to swear by the heavens or by the earth or by the temple or by Jerusalem, then the vow wasn't binding on you anymore. Now, it probably wasn't their purpose. They didn't mean to do this, but the way they applied the law meant that you could get away with lying as long as you lied using the right words. You could swear by some things, and if it wasn't the right things, then it didn't matter anymore. For example, it said, it's kind of like, I got my fingers crossed. The little kid will say something, well, I don't have to do that because I have my fingers crossed. You ever do that when you were a child or hear somebody else? I didn't really mean it. It doesn't really mean anything. That's how they were doing with their oaths. And Jesus pointed out how silly that was. Go back to Matthew, this time go over to chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23, beginning in verse 16, says, Woe to you, ye blind guides, which say, Whosoever shall swear by the temple, it's nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he's a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold. Whosoever shall swear by the altar, it's nothing, but whoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. And that's what they were doing. They say it's okay to swear by the temple. That's just the building, but you can't swear by the altar because the gold on the temple, because that gold is given to God and that takes the place of God. So they were changing these things around. They're saying, well, this, you've got to keep your word, but if you didn't swear by the right thing, then you don't have to keep it anymore. Go down to verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have to done, and not leave the other undone. So because of this teaching, because they had become hypocrites, because they were just making up things as they went, things had changed, and they could say things like, in fact, they would spice up their conversation. Instead of just saying something's going to happen, they'd say, I swear by heaven, I swear by the throne of God, I swear by the earth, I swear by Jerusalem, I swear by the hair of my head. One source I read said that if you swore by Jerusalem, that's okay because that was just a city, so you didn't have to keep your word then. But if you made an oath facing Jerusalem, then you're looking towards the city of God, and so then you had to keep your word. I mean, it was that weird, it was that strange, it was that arbitrary. You had to say the right thing, and then you had to tell the truth. And that gets us to question number 3, because the Pharisees had shifted it from the heart to going through the right motions, and Jesus taught something different. So that's the question number 3. What did Jesus teach about the abuse of the law concerning oaths? Well, first of all, he exposed the hypocrisy in their distinctions. Go back to Matthew 23, look at verse 21, 22 again. Whosoever shall swear by the temple sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. He that sweareth by heaven sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon. He said, if you're making oaths and you're using those things, you're swearing, you're using God. So you've got to tell the truth. You can't say something and say, well, I don't have to do it because I didn't swear by the right words. Jesus said, if you swear, you keep your oath. Now go back to our original text in Matthew 5:33. Jesus said, again, you've heard that it has been said of them by old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it's God's throne, nor by the earth, for it's his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. Verses say that we can swear by these things because they all involve God. Heaven is the throne of God. The earth is his footstool. We may be able to buy some hair dye and change things, but only God can make black hair turn white, white hair turn black. We don't have any control over that. So any oath is an oath to the Lord. Jesus is saying you should have truthfulness in your heart. People shouldn't have to wonder, are you going to do what you say you're going to do? You say it, so you need to do it. That's verse 37. Let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. So always let your yes mean yes. When somebody asks you if you're going to do something, either say yes and do it, or say no and don't do it, but be honest. Any more of that's evil. If you're an honest person, you don't have to say, I promise, or no, really, I swear. If you're honest, you're going to tell the truth. So when he exposed those hypocritical distinctions, some people said, well, then we shouldn't make any oaths at all. That gets us to our final question. Did Jesus forbid even those oaths that people make in court? Some people would say Jesus said don't swear at all, and that means don't swear at all. So if you go to court and they say, do you solemnly swear? You can't do that. And if that's how you believe, then you shouldn't do that, because You don't want to do anything that violates your conscience, that you think is contrary to God's law. However, there's some people that think that there might be exceptions to this. And here's what they point out. They said that both Jesus and James pointed out some qualifications in their statements about oaths. In our original text, Matthew 5:33, Jesus said, "Swear not at all." And then he went off and talked about some things that they shouldn't swear about. For example, verse 34, he says, "I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it's his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king." He said, don't swear at all, and then he told what they're not supposed to swear by. And some people say if he just meant don't swear anything, swear at all, he wouldn't have to list anything. He'd just say, don't make any oaths. Don't swear at all. James did the same thing. Look at James chapter 5. James chapter 5, James followed his command, do not swear, with some qualifiers, some things that they're not supposed to swear about. Look at James 5:12. James writes, "But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, your nay nay, lest ye fall into condemnation." So James said, well, don't swear about these things, but does that mean that they're not supposed to swear at all? Well, some people say don't take any oaths, but God took an oath. Go to Hebrews chapter 6. Hebrews chapter 6. Beginning in verse 16, it says, "For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife, wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things, in which it was impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation who have fled for refuge, to lay hold upon the hope set before us." So God swore to us by himself. If we're not supposed to swear, would God do something and then tell us not to do it? Well, there's some things that God does that we can't do, but that's neither here nor there. But they say that Jesus testified under oath. I'd never really thought about this before. Look at Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, verse 63. Jesus is sitting before the Sanhedrin. Verse 63 says, "But Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure ye by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven." That phrase, "I adjure you by the living God," is translated in other versions as, "I call upon you to swear by the living God. I charge you under oath by the living God." The disciples' literal New Testament says, "I'm putting you under oath by the living God." The council said, "Do you swear that you're telling the truth?" And Jesus didn't say, "Oh, no, we're not supposed to swear. I'm not going to make an oath." What he said was, "You're going to see who the Christ is. Just wait a while." So he answered what they wanted him to say. Finally, Paul made some solemn oaths. Go to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Verse 23 says, "Moreover, I call God for a record upon my soul, that to spare you I came not as yet unto Corinth." Paul says, I'm calling God as a witness. I'm making an oath. I'm making you this promise with God as my witness, basically. So, in light of these verses, they said that maybe there are some exceptions. When we're making an oath, a solemn oath to God, we can use the Lord's name. Maybe we can make an oath in court. Now again, if that violates your conscience, then you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do anything that puts you in jeopardy. But there may be some exceptions. Maybe that doesn't mean just exactly what we thought it always meant. But we know that we shouldn't spice up our conversation by "I swear." We had some people that use the Lord's name in vain all the time when they're talking. And they don't think about what they're saying. Christians would be so truthful. We don't need anything like that. We don't need to say "I swear" or "I promise" or "honest to goodness" or anything else. Yes and no should be enough. Can it be said of us when people know we're Christians that we're people of our word? Sadly, you know some people that are members of the Lord's church that you can't always depend that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. That should never reflect on us. We should never let that be said of us. End every sermon by saying you need to be a Christian. It's the only life worth living, the only death that one would dare to die. If you're living the Christian life, then your yes should mean yes. Your no should be no. You should always mean what you say and say what you mean. Everybody gathered here tonight is already a member of the Lord's church. Are you living like it? Are you walking in the light as He's in the light? Can others bank on our words? Are we known as people of our word? Are we people that people can be confident in? If not, then maybe we need to make some changes. If you're subject in any way to the Lord's invitation, won't you come right now as we stand together as we sing.